Hey there, Banditos. Welcome to a whole new week of Dollar Bin Bandits episodes. I'm Mike Farah. We are kicking off that week with Steve Seagle. Steve is a writer, primarily of comics, of course, but also of animation with his Man of Action collective. He's started out on Renegade Press, did some indie work, then moved on to the major leagues, as it were, Uncanny X-Men, Alpha Flight, a big run on Sandman Mystery Theater. He's known for a very personal story at DC that involves Superman called It's a Bird. And then worked in and has worked in animation with Man of Action, things like Ultimate Spider-Man, Avengers Assembles, and more. So let's get into it with Steve Seagle. Mr. Steve Seagle on the program. Steve, how you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Great. Welcome to the show. I hear that you've listened to a few of the episodes before, so this first question may not come as a surprise. And it
What was
is,
my intro to comics?
how did you first discover comics? You got it.
They were forced on me by my parents. My dad was in the Air Force, and we shopped at the Base Exchange. I think we were on the Air Force Academy at that point, living there. And they bought me a copy of Avengers 89, which scared the crap out of me. And I said, I don't want any more of these. And I avoided comic books other than Mad Magazine until I was a teen, when my best friend Eric Kopish started buying them religiously every week. And I had to walk with him to the grocery store to get them, or the 7-Eleven. So I just started buying some also. So I was reintroduced around the era of Uncanny X-Men 114. So those were my first two comic books. One not by choice, one by choice. Actually, it might
And
have been Marvel Premiere 44. One of the two. Maybe both the same day. I don't know.
oh,
Jack of
I mean,
Hearts.
yeah, could have been, it could have been anything really. I mean, you know, those days, those halcyon days when you're first introduced, it's sort of you could have done a number of things. And yeah, we all remember our first issue. And then thereafter, I think it gets a little blurry because you're just starting to blossom your interest.
There are others. Dot dot dot.
Yeah, exactly. So how do you take this interest and this burgeoning, you know, love of the medium into something that you possibly would want to do as a career? Did that ever strike you as a child?
Well, I did not love the medium. So I was buying these comic books because my best friend was buying comic books, and I was buying the ones he didn't buy, so I'd have something to talk about, uh, other than
Okay.
just listen to him talk about Spider-Man and Nova. So I really was doing it to hang out with my buddy, and then mostly I critiqued them. I love the art, liked a lot of the stories, but if there was a kind of a lemon story or lemon art, I'd be like, oh, I could have done this, I could have done this. And my buddy Eric at one point said, then do it. I'm really tired of years of you saying you could do this, but you don't. And so I sent off proposals all over the place, and one got picked up, and that was for a comic I did called Kafka for Renegade Press. And then I suddenly had to figure out how to do it because it turned out I didn't know how to do this and I couldn't do it better. I had zero experience writing and had to suddenly write a comic, find an artist, letter it, design it, and produce an issue every 30 days for 6 months, which we did. And then that book got nominated for an Eisner, the first year of the Eisners, after it had changed from the Kirbys. We lost to Watchmen. I voted for Watchmen, so I don't begrudge it. But then I was like, I guess this is what I'm doing now. So it was a little accidental.
But it seemed conscious that you were trying to break in with your own work. Or would you have been just as happy to have sent off writing samples for someone at the big two and broke in that way?
I did. I sent off a number of things, and I think I sent off a Black Widow pitch to Tom DeFalco and a Shield pitch to Tom DeFalco, and this Kafka series that was an original. I didn't have enough intention to decide if I was working for a company or myself. I was just like, I'll show you, friend Eric. I'll just send comic proposals, and they'll all sell all over the place. And one did.
What if you didn't have Eric to have your, bounce your, I don't know, your impressions off of in order to show him that you can actually do this. This would have been a whole different conversation.
My original intention was architect, and I got a D in drafting in senior year of high school. And I was like, well, that's not a good omen for that career. And then another intention was to become a teacher, which I eventually did become a college professor, so that's all good. But the comics, so I did comics while I was in college. Kafka was while I was living in the dorms. My next series was for Kamiko called The Amazon that I did with Tim Sale, page of it right there. And that was also while I was still in college. Then I got an offer to go to graduate school. I didn't know what that was. I had never heard of it. I barely knew what my degree was, but I accepted it because I had nothing else to do. So I went to Indiana, Ball State University, taught university, and got a free master's degree in communication, which I had never even had a class in. But I was on the speech team at Boulder, CU Boulder, and we were good. And Ball State asked me to come coach their speech team in exchange for this free master's degree. I did that. And then the person who brought me there was going to go get a PhD. I didn't know what that was, but he was like, "Do you want my job when I leave next year?" And I had no idea what I was doing. Obviously, as you can tell, I just kind of jumped from random thing to random thing. So I became a college professor and I did that for 2 years. And I was doing another comic with Mike Allred at the time that never came out, and more on that later, perhaps. And that got canned because the company went under, and I got a job teaching in California arbitrarily. They just called me up. Actually, a friend called me up from college saying, "Do you want to move to California? I can't afford the rent." And I told her, "Sure." So I moved to California, got a job teaching. And while I was teaching at Pasadena City College in California, a comic book person who had read my other work was like, saw me at a comic shop, I think, or a convention. It was like, "Why don't you do comics anymore?" I'm like, "I don't know. I'm a college professor now." And he was like, "You should come to New York and we'll get you more jobs in comics." So I went to New York. I got jobs at Marvel in DC, and I've been doing comics ever since, along with some animation and stuff with my Man of Action buds.
The rest is history, as they say. Well, you just answered a bunch of questions about. I knew you had taken a break at some point after your Renegade and Kamiko work, and then returned furiously into the mainstream comics period. So thank you for elucidating why and when that was. So you did a lot of work, like you said, at Marvel and DC, particularly Uncanny X-Men, Alpha Flight, during pretty fascinating or at least kinetic, dynamic period in Marvel's history. Um, did you have a lot of challenges in these, taking on these big books from balancing editorial demands and navigating, creative challenges in order to, put your own stamp or just tell your own story?
Yes is the short answer, and now here's a really long version of that answer. I started in the small press, then the independent comic scene, and I was again oblivious to what that all meant. Now I'm very thankful to the people who blazed those trails, and I understand how good I had it just right in the door to be doing exactly what I want. And it took me a long time to get back to doing exactly what I want, which is a treat, not a guarantee. So I became a teacher. When I came back, I went to DC first. I met Bill Kaplan, who offered me work on like Hawkman and stuff like that, just fill in work that other people were having trouble getting done. And I was pretty quick at the time. And he offered me the chance to pitch a series. So I pitched Primal Force, which became part of Zero Hour. The thing I pitched got completely tanked because one of the characters that it was based on, after it was approved and I was working on it, suddenly that character was not available because it was going to be very important to things. And then turned out, of course, not even being in things. But I had to junk my entire concept, come up with a new concept. So that was my first kind of dance with big companies and how quickly things can change. In that case, I said, well, then I'm going to take characters absolutely no one wants, as opposed to trying to use popular characters so I can sell well. And I also learned another lesson, which is if you take characters people absolutely don't want, you won't sell at all, if you're me. So that was how that one went. Bill then left and went to Image. I followed Bill to Image because they had all kinds of issues with getting those books out on time, not the least of which the writing. not being done or done in advance or done at all. And from there, I met Scott Clark, who is no longer with us. Also, Tim Sale no longer with us. People who work with me, I warn you. But Scott Clark, I got along with because I understood how he worked. He liked to draw what he liked to draw, and he got bored way through a lot of things and kind of didn't want to finish them. So I learned a kind of a way to back and forth with him to get him through stuff. And he at some point got approached by Marvel to go do Alpha Flight. He asked me if I would join him on that, and I thought I should because I didn't think that he would survive kind of the Marvel work method with other people. So I wanted to protect him and kind of I knew how to get him through it. So I went with him on the Alpha Flight. I was on Alpha Flight one issue. I turned in one script, and I got offered Wolverine, which I was like, well, that's cool, but I've only done one issue. And it was, Alpha Flight was written in second person. It was weird. It was like conspiracy based. But Marvel was like, yeah, we want you to take over Wolverine. And I thought, well, okay. I liked X-Men. That was my first comic, as I mentioned, that I bought. So I read 200 issues of Wolverine. I got ready to go do Wolverine. I went to the first story conference I got invited to out at the big X-Mini mansion in Long Island. And the night before it, Bob Harris pulled me aside and he's like, we want to move you to X-Men instead. And I said, no chance. I read 200 issues of Wolverine. I've got my stuff figured out. I'm not going to read all the X-Men right now. I don't have time. And he's like, Chris Bachalo is going to draw it. And I said, I hate you so much. I will do X-Men. He's like, do them both. I said, I can't do both. I have too much other work. Still doing Sandman Mystery Theater and Primal Force at the time, I think, and House of Secrets and lots of stuff, or 4 books I know for sure. So I switched over to X-Men with no ideas. I found out that Joe Kelly was writing the other X-Men book, who I didn't know. And then when I heard about him, I didn't like him. And now we've been partners for 25 years. So that was wrong. And he and I got along extremely well right away. And it became very clear at that conference that they were into new writers. We were the first new writers. It was Claremont, then Lobdell, then us. And that's really all that had been on X-Men for any extended period of time. And we were like, this is going to be a lot of fun. I actually like Joe, and we have good ideas. So he and I went off, plotted a year's worth of X-Men stories. They all got approved. We started working on them, and Marvel was bankrupt at the time. And so about every week or two, you'd get a call from editorial going, oh, you know what? We have to really look out for this new owner or this new person who's giving us a financial influx or this, whatever. So change everything you're doing and change it to this. And I don't really begrudge that. That's the shtick of working on big characters at big companies, and X-Men was the top selling book, and Marvel was trying not to go out of business. That was all good. But the other thing that came with that is that editorial would just rewrite stuff in the books constantly, like add twice as much dialogue as I wrote, change, words for characters that the characters would never say, in my opinion. And so this bothered me, it bothered Joe, and we just kept saying, please let us do this work. We don't wake us up at 3 in the morning if it's urgent. We will do it. We'll make these changes. We'll do whatever you need done, but don't put out books with our names on them that don't have stuff we wrote in them. And they just kept doing that. So at some point, Joe and I had made a pledge that we would both quit the same day if it got to be too much. And I was calling Joe when my phone rang, and it was Joe, and he was calling me to tell me he was quitting. I was like, I was calling you to tell you I was quitting. So we both quit, formed Man of Action, and now here we are 2.5 decades later.
I definitely want to get into Man of Action, and that's a very interesting story. And I'm glad you guys were of the same mind at the same time, so you could do it together. But I did want to rewind. We're going to bounce around a little bit here. You mentioned already Sandman Mystery Theater. This is a big book for you. You were on it for quite a long time, a number of issues. And won some Eisner or Eisner nominations at least. What was it about that series that made you stick around for so long? And what did you have as a vision for it? Since you were not the originator writer, from what I've seen, you came in, I feel like issue 12 or 13. That you did see sort of the potential.
So I had worked on Grendel with Matt Wagner, who is the creator of Grendel and Mage and many other things. He's also an artist, great guy, love him to death. Officiated his son's wedding. Like that's how tight we eventually became. So he though is he's like a monolith creator. He's very smart, he's very talented. And he started Sandman Mystery Theater with Guy Davis and other artists in rotation, but primarily Guy Davis. And he had done a year and he wanted to get back to, I think it was Mage at the time, doing another installment of his kind of auto bio superhero fantasy book, and told Karen Berger, the executive editor and the editor of Vertigo and of Sandman Mystery Theater, that he needed to move on and that she needed to get a new writer. And she didn't want him to leave. And he said, okay, well, how about if I get a co-writer? And because I had worked on a Grindel one shot for him and a Grindel miniseries for him, I think that predates the Mystery Theater. Um, he called me for some reason, and I heard his pitch, and I thought, well, I do like that book, but Matt and Steve is going to be like just chaos. Like we're both going to be very headstrong, and it's just going to be a fight fest. And he said, oh, I don't think so. Fly up to Portland and we'll talk about it. So I flew up to Portland and he started cooking dinner. He's a really good cook. He handed me his baby. He's like, I have to go to the store, watch this baby. And he just left. So I'm at his house with his baby and this food percolating. And then he came back and I was like very distracted. And he just started talking about Sandman Mystery Theater. And we just started shooting ideas. And then the next thing I know, it was 5 years later. We never even really talked about how we would work. We just started working and it worked. So the process is really enjoyable. I love the book. I like period pieces. Huge fan of the 1939 New York World's Fair, and I know that Sandman, the Golden Age Sandman, made it up to the fair in the original DC comics. So I was like, I want to do that. Loved Guy Davis. Loved all the artists that stepped in when Guy didn't do an arc. And I got to do a ton of research, which I enjoy. So for me, it was a dream job. It's the longest thing I've ever worked on. I don't tend to do ongoing stuff much, and now I don't do it at all, and I don't have any interest in it. But I cared a lot about Wes and Diane, the main characters. I saw it as a romance book, so I let uh, Matt worry about what the mystery was, and I just worried about where those two were. Are they getting along? Are they not getting along? Are they fighting? Are they not fighting? Are they going to get married? Or are they going to break up? And that's what I was into each time. And Matt kept doing, progressively less. He was just trying to sneak away and go do his own thing. And my job became to keep him on the book as long as I could, which was up until the last 12 issues where he was like, dude, I got stuff to do. So he finally departed. I did the last runs, and then that was it. 70 issues, and that's all she wrote.
What are the challenges? You mentioned, not wanting to do ongoing, and you've only done a few examples of that work. But what are the challenges in ongoing that are particularly difficult to overcome, or that you prefer less to a limited series? And does it have anything to do with, closure or having an ending that makes it sort of difficult to keep the energy going?
Well, it does. I mean, some of the runs that I love, like Daredevil by Miller and Jansen or Daredevil by Bendis and Maleev, those are ongoing series that have endings. The stories get to things and they resolve things and they introduce new things. So I think that can be done quite well. I'm just not a person who wants to do that. I'm a very experimental writer. I like to mess up my process. I like to explode form. I like to try new things. I like to just not repeat myself as much as possible. And again, I think there are people who are incredibly adept in ongoing work at not doing those things. I find that I just fall into a pit of thinking the same way about the same thing repeatedly. I think I could do an ongoing now of an existing character because I would approach it radically differently than I did 20 years ago when I was doing that kind of stuff. But at the time, I, like a lot of neo writers, you want to do the book you loved instead of doing the book that's you. And the book that's you is the one that's going to be great. And the book trying to do the book you love is going to be a copy that's not going to be great. So I think that was my shortcoming with that stuff. I tend to think, in reference to another thing you said, of endings first now. That's how I start. If I write, I'm on the last scene or the last page going, what's this going to get me to? What's somebody who's reading this going to arrive at? What am I giving them when it's done? And then I back out of it. I write backwards from the ending and go, well, that seems like this is as far away as you could get. So I'm going to start there. And, in my kind of realm, that's 6 issues, 120 pages worth of thought. I don't tend to go back further than that, even though novelists and stuff obviously can and do. So for me, just doing a graphic novel or a mini series or whatever, a one shot, that makes more sense for the way I think about story and for the things that I want to say. And I also have done a lot of stuff where I was like, if this works, I'll do a million of them, and they don't work at all sales wise. So I think it's better for me, better for publishers if I have concise ideas, get those done, and move along.
And if you're giving yourself constraints on how far back you'll go, you can always think about things instead of sequels as prequels. You always have that option to
You
choose a
do,
prequel.
but
I'm
how
kidding,
far
of
back do you
course.
go? Like if I go, the ending of this is the Earth is perfect. I can go back to the Paleolithic era, like but it's just gonna be 120 pages to get from Paleo
Yeah,
to
of course.
today, because really the best stories are thematically based, right? So you're going. The one I like to use the most is Star Wars for me. The reason it resonates still, even though I saw it when I was a kid at 12 and the original one came out, it says small people can do big things. So that's it. If I have that to say to somebody, I want to say that in a book or a series or whatever, but I don't want to say it again. So characters have these operational themes that run throughout their existence, and they run throughout a story, and they run throughout an issue, and they run throughout an arc. I'm kind of more into the arc version of that.
Right.
So, I love Daredevil. I always thought I would want to do Daredevil, but then I thought it will be a copy of the ones I like, so I'm not going to even try to get it. But if I did do Daredevil, I would do something about his core theme for 12 issues, and that would be it. I wouldn't want to do another 12 issues because that's still his core theme, and
Right.
I don't want to look at it from another angle. I just want to move on to the next thing.
Yeah. You would have to change, I suppose, change arcs. And if there's not really, then you might be changing the character, even if you've done the arc that you feel like is applicable to that character to do something else and change it radically from one arc to a different arc. Yeah, I can
But again, it's
understand where
like the Miller
that's
Jansen stuff, like, and I'm my house burned down, all my comics burned down, so I'm really in a weird place of back to my seminal comics. Like, am I going to
mhm.
replace any and which ones? So I apologize that all my references are from my childhood, but those are the comics that are in my brain at the moment. But uh, the Miller arcs, even in the original run, which I love, and in the slight revisit for Born Again, they do a great job of staying with one operational theme for that character, but looking at it from different ways. This I'm looking at it from he's at the heights of justice. I'm looking at it from he is at the depths of despair. I'm looking at it from the outside and the point of view of his girlfriend. And like he did a really good job of turning that over in lots of interesting ways. So again, I applaud people who are great at that. That's not my strength, so I'm going to do something else.
Well, you've had an incredibly diverse career that spans not only mainstream superhero comics, creator-owned work, animation, graphic novels. How do you approach switching between the different mediums and audiences? Is it something you are consciously like switching something on and off, or at this point, have you just sort of the advantages and disadvantages of each?
Uh, I'm long in the tooth here, so I think this is my 38th year in comics slash media published year. Um, so I call it a toolbox when I'm teaching. It's the toolbox. Like, what do you have in your toolbox that you can use? So my toolbox, I think, is pretty well stocked. So if I walk into a job situation for like an animated series, I know some things. Like I know that the age demo will let me do certain things depending on what the lower and higher ends of that are. I know the constraints of the technology. I know things about voice recording for actors and what they like, what they don't like, how to get the best things out of them or not. I know what board teams want or don't want to do. I know what directors want and don't want to do. So the job for me as part of Man of Action is almost always story based, world building based. And, there are things we know. The trick is not to think you know everything, right? Because that's where it gets tired. That's where you're doing the same stuff over and over again. My favorite artists in comics are the ones who don't look like they looked a year ago because they're still progressing and evolving. And I have a lot of artists that I loved, and now they're still doing the same thing. No new tricks. I want their style. I want them to look like them, but I also want them to push and go somewhere new. And I want to do the same thing. So the toolbox needs to be open, and you need to always be looking for tools. I watch other people's shows and go, "Oh man, I wouldn't have thought to pace something that way," or "Oh man, I wouldn't have thought to work backwards." That was like 7 years ago thing that Man of Action started doing because we heard about somebody else doing that. We're like, "What? Let's try that." So I'm up to try things. I'm doing a book right now with Teddy Christensen, who I've worked with a lot, Danish artist, called Mercury. This is what it looked like when I got it from him, the art, because it's 240 panels in that shape that I got in random sequence. And so my job in this case was not to write him a script, it was for him to draw me some art. And I've gone behind that and put it in order and written a story based on that sequence of art. So it's a book that neither one of us knew what we were working on while it was happening. Can a book be done that way? Yeah, I finished it. I think it feels like a Stephen Teddy book, even though we didn't build it the way we've built other books we've worked on. And so I'm always trying to do things like that, just find new ways to use the tools in the toolbox and get to story.
Tell me a little bit more about working backwards, because when I hear that, I hear what you were talking about earlier, which is having an end in mind and sort of backing out of that. Is this more of a process driven term, or just explain a little bit more about what working backwards is and how Man of Action landed on that?
So Man of Action is Joe Kelly, Joe Casey, Duncan Rouleau, all comic book guys. We all met doing comics, and then we became an animation and world building company after the fact. But we'd all done monthly comics, so we all know about building towards something, and the kind of slog of that, the joy of that, and the kind of cartoons we do, which are primarily boys action cartoons. Though we argue with the word boys, they're for anybody who wants them, but that's kind of the genre it's called. uh, has a lot in common with superheroes, and we've done a lot of superhero cartoons. And Joe Casey, who we call Evil Joe, there's Good Joe, which is Joe Kelly, and Joe Casey's Evil Joe, and they know it. Joe Casey came in one day to our office and he's like, "I'm done with plot," he just declares. And I'm thinking, well, what an ass. Plot is what we do. Like, we're writers, we need plot. But what he was getting at was he's done stacking up plot bricks trying to get to an ending. And what that gave us was this idea of, what if we don't do that? What if we ignore plot initially and only talk about theme, what we're getting at? This wasn't all Joe Casey. He railed against some of this, though eventually we made him lay down and agree to it. But so if you take that Star Wars example, like if it is little people can have a big impact. So that's going to be the end. A little person has the biggest impact. Right before that, if you back up a step, you'd go, okay, well then for that to really sing, it needs to look like a little person will have no impact and can't right before that. And if you back up a step, you need to go, a little person is going to try to have a big impact. And then right before that, it would be the little person can't possibly have an impact because they're too far away from the impact to influence it. And you keep backing that up. You keep turning over this idea of the little person having a big impact until you get to a place where it's so far away from them having the impact that they want to, but there's absolutely no way it could ever happen. And that's what we call a thematic outline. Like, we've yet to even discuss anything. And if we decide right now that it's not Star Wars, that it's Star Trek, it will still work. Like, the plot is irrelevant. The that thematic outline will work. So now we go, whose story is it? Who's the smallest person in Star Trek? Um, you could take that lots of ways. Like, you could take it in terms of their job, like who's got the lowest ranking job. Is it Uhura because communications is bottom? Is it the shortest person, which I guess is Chekhov in the original one, or the redo one by Abrams? If it's Chekhov's story, then at the end, Chekhov is going to have the biggest impact because all the people before him, like Smart Spock and Captain Kirk, and savvy uh, my brain, since fire remembers nothing, the engineer, Scotty,
Oh,
like
Scott.
they're going to try to do things that don't work, and the small person's going to be shunted, but it's going to be the small person we need to do the thing at the end. In Star Wars, it's Luke who winds up being the only person who can shoot down a little tiny trench because he did it on his little tiny planet with his little tiny speeder. So he's the one who can do it, not all the force of the resistance and against all the force of the Empire. So that kind of thinking lets you build a story that is bulletproof. The turnover of those themes is going to get you there, and that there is going to matter because you're going to have been on a journey with somebody who just can't. There's no way. Oh, he got there, and that's going to make you go, wow, that's pretty cool. And now I, as a small person, feel like I can accomplish anything because I watched or read or saw or sang this piece of media. So to me, that's how you make the magic work ideally.
Interesting. And you, it sounds like you hit upon this, or you as a group hit upon this after you've all been in comics for a long time and have done a lot of work already. So coming to this formula is something, not, I don't want to say it's a formula, but coming to this realization is something new and something that you think that would work better in both comics, animation, and other media.
Yes to a lot of things you said. So first up, it's not like we invented this. This comes from us keeping our ears and eyes open to a lot of people doing things. Like the theme part, that's a Pixar hallmark. That's all about theme for them. So that comes from hearing about their work process. This operational theme character version of that comes from an essay I read by Javier Grillo Marxwatch, who wrote on Lost. He wrote this essay called What's an Operational Theme and Why Don't I Have One, which is well worth a read if you're into this sort of thing. That had parts of this idea. But that's the toolbox, right? It's like putting that in my toolbox, putting that in my toolbox, putting that in my toolbox. And then you mix this stuff up and go, what's that work process look like? So that you don't have the same work process you had 20 years ago, so that you're not making the same kind of stuff you made 20 years ago. So I hope if I ever got interviewed by you again, like 5 years from now, I go, yeah, we don't do any of that anymore. We now do this
Yeah.
because I've kept my ears and my eyes open for other things that seem interesting or a way to get at it. Doing the Mercury book out of order and with no script is a big leap, but not if you go, you know what? I'm confident that the first thing I did with that book was go, what are the last 5 images? I didn't go, how does it start? I was like, what are the last 5 things I want to read in this book or see in this book? What are those five? And it could have been any of the 240. And I received them out of sequence. I don't even know if Teddy had a sequence in mind, but just committing and going, these are the last 5 things you'll see, that immediately illuminates a story. But if I had picked a different five, which I think would have worked just fine, it would illuminate a different story with a different theme, probably.
This brings up a whole, host of different questions, but I think I want to go in the direction of collaboration and
Hmm.
specifically your work in visual media. And you're collaborating in comics with more than one person, but predominantly the artist to tell a story. And then, of course, letters, colors, and things of that sort. People, a team. In animation, it is fully a large team that you're trying to work with to get a story across. What is, I mean, and you just talked about this new sort of experimental, what I consider experimental way of, telling the story, starting with the artist. How has that changed for you? And what do you, I guess, like best about a visual medium that allows for such collaboration? And these are all different questions packed into one, but is I mean, do you see it being a handoff back and forth between writer and artist as to who starts first? Because this is an interesting, this Mercury process is totally interesting and it's almost inverted in the way we think of, the writing coming first versus the visuals.
Yeah, I'll touch on Mercury for just a second and say that is literally me going, why does this process always start with a script? What if it started with all the art finished and then a script happened? Like
Hmm.
starting at the end, working backwards, working upside down in this case. So that's just literally asking the philosophical question you asked and then doing a book that way to see what happens. Um, the script, so again, I've changed a lot. I just saw Chris Bachalo, who I hadn't seen in many years, came by because he was in California, who drew my X-Men issues. Brilliant guy. And I apologized to him. I said, I wish you and I had done the X-Men now instead of when I thought my job was to tell you what to draw. Some artists want to be told what to draw. Some artists don't. And my job, as I understand it now, if I'm doing comics, is first to talk to who I'm working with and see what they need. What do you need? You're the person who's going to be doing this for 30 days. What do you need from me to have that 30 days be the best possible 30 days you could have drawing an issue? And if they say a full script with everything in it, like Teddy Christensen usually does, then that's what I want to give them. If they say a 2-page synopsis of what's going to happen in an issue, which is what Guy Davis wanted on Sandman Mystery Theater, that's what I want to give him. If they say only the dialogue and I'll worry about where it takes place, that's what I want to give them. I may go back and go, can I at least tell you it happens in the county fair? But ideally, I'd rather not. I'd rather just figure out what they need and give them that. The script in comics, who's it for? It's for the artist. It's not for the reader. It's for the artist to get through and make it. The dialogue is for the letterer to see what to letter. The script itself is for the editor in a way to go, you should publish this story and you won't get fired if you do, and it might make money. That's what they're reading it for. There are things in the descriptions for the colorist to go, this is at night. This is bright sunshine. This is whatever. Also for the artist. But that's it, right? You're writing a map for different people to travel. And so that map needs to be great for all of them to figure out how to get where they're going. And I think too often, especially as a new writer for me and maybe other new writers, you're going, this is an expression of my ego and my desire to be a great storyteller. It's not that. That's not really what it's for. If we do a cartoon, like you were saying, that's got screenplay format, and screenplay format, though people don't think about it this way, is really budgetary in a lot of ways. So the slug line, which says interior Steve's office day, that's talking to a director and going, you need to get an office. Or if it's animation, you need to design an office. And they may go, well, we don't have the money to make an office. Could it take place in the burger joint we already have? Yes, interior burger joint day, same scene. Then the next thing is like descriptions of the scene. Steve sits down, he plugs in a new microphone, he talks into a camera for an interview. So that's talking to a board team in animation. Draw this, draw me sitting, draw me turning on, draw me plugging in, draw me talking, or to an artist in a script. Then it's got dialogue. Steve, can you hear me? Is my mic on? Michael, yeah, I can hear you okay, but you're dropping out. So that's telling a casting director, you need to hire Steve and Michael. And then it's also telling the actor who is Steve, you're going to say this line, so be ready to say it in a convincing way. It's a map for people to do their jobs. If it says interior Steve's office, bookcase with stack of books, and it's live action, a prop person has to go find the books. A set decorator has to get that bookcase. It's like you're just telling people the job that's needed by everybody. And so you've got to think of it in any case as a collaborative document. And how can that collaborative document make people's life enjoyable for the amount of time it takes them to do the task you're asking them to do?
This may already, be somewhere in storybooks. I'm sure the word has, but it really sounds like what you're doing with the script, and whether in animation or comics, is you're putting together scaffolding, right? And there may be a little bit of structure so that you can hang or build walls. An artist can interpret and build, what they want out of the structure you've given them, whether it's a small amount or a large amount, and be able to sort of fill in the blanks and form the story in sort of collaboration. Is that sort of a good metaphor for how this works? And does that work more as a metaphor for animation versus comics, or both?
Well, I like metaphors in general, so scaffolding works for me. My door looks like scaffolding behind me a little bit. Um, yeah, I think people who are working want to be happy working, right? You don't want it to be a grind. So if I'm writing a script for an artist, I go, what do you need? And they'll go full script, plot only, dialogue, no dialogue, whatever. I want that. Then I also am going to tweak them. I'm going to go, you've never done this. I want you to try this. So that they're also thinking outside of their toolbox a little bit so that the thing we do together will be new and different. And sometimes that has the impact of freaking them out and stressing them out, and that's not a good idea. Sometimes it has the exact opposite and makes them inspired and excited to do something new. But if we're doing a second issue, I'll go, how did that work? Was that push you too far? Not enough? And it's back and forth. So it's a living document that should make everybody working as happy as possible to get the work done and do the best possible version of that story you can all do. So when I see things like, here's how you write a comic book script, I'm like, there is no way. Like every script I write for every series or every artist is different because the artist needs a different script to be happy for 30 days. Or in the case of the Mercury book, no script. And I don't know if that made Teddy happy. I just said, go draw pictures. I don't care what they are. You can have a story in mind. You can have no story in mind. I'm going to deal with it after. And maybe that stressed him out. Maybe that inspired him. We'll talk to him later, maybe and find out. But it's just like How do you keep that day interesting and not a day they've lived? And again, if somebody came to me and said, look, I like the way my days go. I want to sit down with one page of script and draw it from 9 to 5, and I don't want to think anything about it, I can write that script for them too. But I don't want to assume that's the script they want.
So your preference is really what the artist prefers. You don't necessarily prefer Marvel method versus full script versus maybe something else. It's really in service of the artist and getting to a point where it's the best collaborative story that you both can tell.
Yeah, I mean, when I worked in corporate comics, I did the script that my editors said was required,
Right.
and now I would fight to not do that.
Mm.
I don't want my editors to get fired either. I have to make their life easy, and if they need that version of the script, I may have to do that script, but I might want to change that before I give it to the artist so that they're not dealing with an editor's script uh, necessarily if that's not what they want. This is not how things are done. This is why primarily I just do my own stuff through Image because I can work however I want. I don't have an editor, and that's both good and bad. I've had really great editors, and I probably do better with an editor. But in the way I'm thinking about making things these days, it's probably easier if I don't subject somebody to all of that.
Well, let's get into a little bit of that. You've done a lot of creator-owned work and doing probably more recently. But one of the highlights is It's a Bird, which was or is a personal and introspective kind of take on Superman and creativity in general. What sort of drove you to create this kind of meta narrative and the struggle of writing such, big, larger than life characters?
Well, it's funny you would call that creator owned because that's actually one of my most personal books, and I don't own it. It's fully owned by DC because Superman is in it, and I
Uh,
agreed to that. But I appreciate that because I did approach it like a very personal work done through DC. And I've only had two times where I've had an idea just lightning bolt into my head completely done. And that is one of them. I was in Denmark visiting Teddy, the artist on it, and I said I got to go take a leak. I went to his bathroom and we were literally talking about what to do next and had no ideas after House of Secrets. And during the course of taking a 2-minute leak, which seems long, I thought of the entire book and I came out like, Teddy, here's what we're doing. And I literally told him that story start to finish almost exactly as you read it. And immediately knew I was in trouble because DC would not allow any DC characters to be used in Vertigo by that point, and certainly not Superman ever. So I was like, this is a problem because I know I have to do this book. I know they're going to say no. What do I do? And I went to San Diego Comic Con about a month later and wound up in an elevator with Paul Levitz, and only heard him say to somebody in the elevator, he's like, I don't know why people don't bring us Love and Rockets. We would publish Love and Rockets. And Bone, we would have published Bone, but nobody brings us Bone. They think we won't take chances. And the doors open and he got out, and that's all I heard. So I thought, okay, this is my way. So I wrote a letter to Paul and I was like, Dear Paul, I want to do this Vertigo book with Superman and about Huntington's disease in my family. And I know you're going to say no, but I feel like you're a bigger risk taker than most people think. I feel like you would probably have published Love and Rockets if somebody brought it, or Bone if somebody had brought it, but nobody ever brings those to you. So I'm bringing you that now. It's a bird. You just have to have the confidence that it'll be good. And when Karen Berger said, no, we can't even pitch it because we'll get in trouble. We can't use Superman. I said, I know. Just give Paul this letter. I have a feeling he'll approve it. And she gave him the letter, and he read the letter, and he approved it. So thank goodness for bathrooms and elevators.
yeah. Yes, I did misspeak when I said creator owned. I suppose I meant sort of creator originated rather than something that would be
Yeah, and again,
assigned
I
to
appreciate
you.
it because
Yeah,
that book to me, if I could own it, I would, but I also felt like it wouldn't thematically deliver if it wasn't Superman. Like if I did an
right.
amalgamated my version of Superman, it would have been lackluster. It needed to be that guy.
Yeah.
Because I really don't like Superman. I wrote Superman for a year. That didn't change any of my opinions. Uh, I don't like him personally just because of what that book says about superheroes. And but I respect him tremendously. And that's what the book is me battling Superman metaphorically and him winning because he's Superman.
Superman always has to win.
Yeah.
Um, but a lot of your graphic novels tackle, personal themes. Do you, when you're I guess you're not pitching them at so much anymore because you have an established reputation and you're saying this is what I'd like to do. But do you ever think about the, hate to use kind of this phrase, but the commercial appeal, maybe the curb appeal of a comic because it is such a saturated market when you're devising these, more personal and intimate stories? Like, how do you balance what you think, if you even take this into consideration, what people want to read with the kind of deeply personal stories you want to tell?
Uh, I mean, I like genre stuff too. So not everything I do is, you know, autobiographical, self-referential. Like I like that stuff, but I like a lot of kinds of stuff. I am all over the place. I think my biggest commercial failing is that my next book is never anything like my last book. So if you like my last book and you buy my next book, you're like, what is this? This is not what I wanted. Because I've turned 90 degrees and gone somewhere else. And it's very hard to build an audience constantly leaving them behind and them going, but I wanted,
More
and
of
I'm aware
this.
of that. And I probably should not do that if I want to have a more high profile career. Although at this point, why bother? And better sales, which my publishers would like me to do. But that's not who I am. And I think, again, we're back to that idea of copy of a copy, which is as soon as I go, I need to make something commercial, I've lost in terms of comics because I will make something repetitive, derivative, and it also will not work, but I will be unhappy with it on top of that. So I don't feel like that's a good idea. In animation or film or television, of course, I start from a place of will this earn its money back? Will it make money? Does it have a commercial possibility in terms of merchandise avenues? Because that's part of that job. Like those things don't get made if you don't think about that. Uh, so I'm able to do that. I'm able to put on that hat, but I feel like I do people a better service if people get Mercury when it comes out next year. I think. Uh, it'll be an experience and it'll be a weird book and it'll be a thing like they've never seen before. Unfortunately, there's not a ton of people who wake up in the morning and go, I want a comic that really challenges me. But there are some. So I am making books like this for those people. I did a, do I have books in my office? Yes. I mean, the last thing I did an image was Get Naked because I wanted to do essays. I was like, can comic books be essays? And the answer is yes. Got nominated for two Eisners, lost them both because that's what I do. Nominations, no wins.
It's
Humor
just an
book.
honor to be nominated,
It
though.
better be because I think I've lost 10 or 11. But it's it's comedy. It's funny. I hadn't done a funny thing before. People are like, what? But it got nominated for best humor publication. So I felt like, okay, well, it must have been somewhat funny. And I put naked on the cover. I was like, okay, if this book's going to sell at all, it's got to have some salacious quality. So the word naked will be be a naked person on the front. It's about getting naked. How can this fail commercially? Well, it did okay, but it didn't do great, right? So nominated for two Eisners, comedy, lots of great art by lots of different students, most of them from Denmark and parts of Europe, but not a ton of heat. So what I am confident is that we made a good book. Like it's a fun book. It's a great read. It's beautiful to look at. It's exactly what I wanted to do. And over time, maybe people find it. Uh, some people did find it. I don't want to pretend like obviously some people read it, but it's not a blockbuster, but it might be later. And I'd rather have something that will stand the test of time. I could sell this book in 20 years and still think the same thing about it than something that was trying to be commercial in the moment, or maybe even was commercial in the moment, and 5 years later it looks like yesterday's laundry.
Let's take a wild swing back to, or not back to, but in the opposite direction, which I think is animation work, because that is supposed to appeal to as many kids as possible. It is mass appeal that you're going for, and you've worked on things like Ben 10, which is obviously a Man of Action production, but also Big Hero 6, Ultimate Spider-Man, Avengers Assemble. What was your role like on the latter ones where you and your partners were not necessarily working on your own property. Because I see executive producer, often we don't know what that is. And, what did you do and what was your role and what were you trying to do for these shows? And then we could get into Ben 10 as sort of a uh, offshoot or a different approach than that.
Sure. I mean, well, let's just talk about Man of Action and what we do, the two
Sure.
Joes, Duncan and myself. That we are essentially a company that creates original properties or redevelops existing properties. And we do that via what's called a world build. So we're building a new world for something that exists, or we're building a completely new world for something. So those are the two kind of avenues that we get hired in. And on something like Ben 10, we make that up from the ground up. We go, kid, 10 different things he turns into, thematic core of I have the power I need, but I feel like I need more than I have. We make up all that stuff. Who are the supporting characters? Where does it take place? When does it take place? It's just literally making up stuff. We also do that for video games. We do that for television. We do that for animation. So that's that lane. Sometimes people come to us and they go, "Hey, Sonic the Hedgehog, we're gonna do the movies are doing well. We want to do new animated show. They can't be the same thing." So we go, okay, we'll build a new world for Sonic that doesn't violate the existing movie world or what we've known before, but is still Sonic and go somewhere different. And that will be Sonic Prime, which is on Netflix. But we do the exact same thing. Here are the cast. Here's new iterations of the characters. Here's the world that it takes place in. Here's how it relates to the world that exists. Here are potential stories. Here are a lot of thematic centerings for it. Here's the season 1, season 2, season 3 shape. And then we write for that sometimes. On Sonic, we oversaw a writing staff. Sometimes Man of Action will just write it. Sometimes we write the pilot and then hand it off to other people to do. So the Man of Action piece is origination of the world build, creating a world build Bible. That's the thing we hand over, and at least one script. And then, if we're going to stay on the production, if we like it or they like us or some mix of those things, our executive producer position is writing. So we will oversee a writing staff, or we will be the writing staff, or some mix of that. And that just means that we're going to have the story conferences. We're going to break the episodes. We're going to shape the season arcs. We're going to assign the writers. We're going to check their work when it comes in, give back notes, fix things that don't work. We then see that through to the board meetings where we watch the board teams pitch and go, that you got it, or you missed that joke, or could this be stronger? But a director is also, that's their territory, so we try to not say too much there. We go to voice records so that if the voice director is having somebody do lines and goes, is that supposed to be funny? We go, yeah, but it's not. Here's a different line. Try this one. We can fix it. So an executive producer who's actually working is going to every step meeting for a production and providing whatever input is needed to make everybody else's life easier, to smooth over rough patches because we have an understanding of the total picture of it. So that's kind of where we live. And we've done that. We've done up to 5 shows at once, which was way too many for 4 guys. We survived, but barely. We comfortably do 2 shows at the same time, and or a video game and a show or whatever. Like there's only 4 of us, so there's only so much that can be done. But that's what we do. That's the way we work, and then we do our comics on the side.
And how exactly do you work together? What is the distribution of tasks, I suppose, between the 4 of you? Is it different by project?
It varies wildly by project. So what I like about the 4 of us is that we're good friends. We've been good friends for decades, but we do not have the same aesthetics at all. We don't like the same stuff. We don't listen to the same music. We don't read the same books. We don't jam on the same movies most of the time. Although we did all love Speed Racer, so make of that what you will. Um, but that's actually great because then when we're meeting and we're going, okay, here's Ultimate Spider-Man. Is this a good idea for an episode? There's no kind of group think, yeah, that's great from everybody because nobody thinks about it the same way. So when a story gets all 4 guys going, yeah, that sounds really good, it probably works because it's seeming good from all these different angles as opposed to people who think the same way about it. And that's been kind of what has made it work for 25 years is we know a good idea when we hear it, and we gravitate to it. And you can let go of what you were thinking. In the first 3 years we existed, it was like, but I want to do my idea, but I want to do my idea. And at some point when we got rid of that, and it was, I just want to do the idea that works. I want to do the idea that will get approved. I want to do the idea that will people will love. And being able to let go of your ego, I thought of that and shift it to whoever thought of that, that's great. That's when things started working. So, there are, I think each of us is good at different things. So if we're in a pinch, for example, and something is due quick, Joe Casey is the fastest writer. So if it's got to be in tomorrow, he's got to do that step. It may not be great when he's done because he did it really fast, but somebody else in Man of Action is really good at punching it up and making it better. And somebody else may be good at editing it down because it got too long. And somebody else is better at, making the theme run through everything. So we know what everybody is good at. We work more or less collectively at all times, but if it requires a special task, we know who to go to and have them do that. And the last thing I'll say before this gets to be too long is that very early on, what we realized was that it's a time company. It's not a money company. It's a time company.
Mm.
So what we're trading each other is time. So if we go, Joe Casey, you got to write this thing overnight, and he's going to drop everything else he's doing. We got to pick up everything else he would be doing so he can write that overnight. We've got to trade the time for this, for that, whether you want to do this or not. So that's really what it boils down to is the way we work has a lot to do with what is due, how much time is that going to take, and who can get the various pieces over the finish lines.
Do you, and hopefully we will have, the opportunity to speak to the other partners, but specifically for you, do you get kind of cognitive like whiplash going from, again, these sort of mass appeal properties where you're working with a team to try to come up with things that are, um, as I keep saying and repeating, massively appealing versus, again, your more maybe idiosyncratic, personal, what you find interesting kind of stories that you're doing in comics. Are you doing those things in tandem? Like, are you doing them the same day? Or
Yeah.
do you have to take rests between them to sort of shift your brain?
So me 10 years ago would say what I like is that I'm totally turning my brain onto something else. I used to always work on two projects at once. I still do. I have a writers group every Thursday at a Korean spa, and a bunch of people show up and we write all day. And I open two different projects so that the minute I stall on one, I go to another one that's wildly different so that I don't lose time. I'm just shifting to something else. And I used to think, oh, that's because they're so different. I just jump into this other space and it clears my head and blah, blah, blah. Now I think they're exactly the same. Like the matrix behind the curtain of all of this is theme and working backwards. And if Get Naked is about the idea that well, I don't want to say what I think the theme of that book is. I want people to have it for themselves. But if one theme was you even when you're naked, you're fully dressed. Maybe that's a theme. Then that's no different than a theme of Ben 10 being you already have the power you need, right? Because in each case, I'm telling a story that's getting me to this idea. And the set dressing, the scaffolding is theme turn, theme turn, theme turn, theme. And the scaffolding is hung. And I could do a Ben 10 episode where the theme is even when you're naked, you're still fully dressed. Because the naked is going to be metaphorical about power and the Omnitrix and the aliens. It's not going to be literal getting naked. And I could flip the other way. I could do a get naked essay that says you already have the power you need. I feel terrified getting naked, but I already have the power to do it if I believe in that, right? So they look exactly the same thematically, but they look totally different when you put the characters and the settings and the animation versus the comic books on them. But it's really the same exact process.
So it's a strength of the theme and the strength of the what you sort of set up, the underlying structure, I guess, that makes it easy or easier than it would look from the outside to move from one project to the other because there is this, foundation that is kind of easy to jump into.
Your current me thinks the foundation of things is very much the same. And then what you've got to be adept at is okay, I'm doing a kids show. Kids want bright colors. Kids want loud noises and fart jokes. Kids want aspirational, superheroics. Kids want to see the hero fail so that they feel like if they fail, it's okay. none of that really applies to Get Naked, but that theme could have been the same for either one of them, right? But then in the set dressings of Get Naked, autobiography. I want to be really truthful and forthcoming. I want to tell somebody an experience that will remind them an experience they had and make them feel better about that, right? So the scaffolding is the same and the dressing is really different.
Hmm. Well, I've learned a lot about narrative and storytelling in this conversation. So, Steve, I really have to thank you for taking the time to talk with me. And, I'm sure the listeners are going to be very interested in sort of the perspective on working in these different media and what is similar between them and what is different. Let me ask you what you are working on now that we can look forward to in the near future.
Sure, I don't know how near the future is, but obviously there's Mercury.
Mercury, of
I don't know
course.
if it'll look like this even. I'm not sure what this book is going to look like, but it's fully painted, beautiful.
Oh, good. I was asking you, the rubber band around it just was begging for you to do exactly what you just did. I'm like, please just take that off
Well,
and flip through it.
and I've shown this to people, and now they want the book to look like this. So I don't know if that's really possible the way that we've put it together, but maybe everything's possible, I guess. So that is now done. We're just working on formatting, obviously. And then it may be a Kickstarter, it may be Image. I haven't quite figured that out yet, or both. Who knows? I'm working on a podcast and book about the failed Mike Allred comic. It's a lot of it was done. It can never come out. So I'm doing a murder mystery podcast and book about its death and why it died. And the comic itself was also a murder mystery. So it's a murder mystery about a murder mystery. And
This
that's
wasn't Solstice, was it? Or that was one that you started but
Solstice
then
did come out.
completed? Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
that one made it out through Image. I had nearly every copy left of Solstice at my house when it burned to the ground, and all my books. So my books are now much more rare than they used to be because I had all the backstock, and now it's all ash. So rush out and find Solstice. No, it was called Jaguar Stories, and it just never made it. But it was the book that got Mike out of the Air Force and into comics. So it did some good, but it also almost ruined his life and then never came out. So that's what the podcast is about. And the
Intriguing.
book is an interesting deconstruction of what exists. And then I'm working on, I have all the rights back to House of Secrets, which will now be called something else. And Teddy and I are going to do something with that. I have another book that I'm working on with an artist in Argentina that I won't name yet because we're in the early stages of that. But it's a mini series. That's probably all I should say. It's just a mini series. And then I'm forgetting something big. Can't think. Oh, Duncan, obviously from Man of Action, and I have a mini series coming out as well that people will be surprised we're doing. We're a little surprised we're doing it, but it's very fun. Can't announce that, not announced yet. And then Man of Actions, we're working on a video game that's coming out next year with a company in Sweden. Can't tell you the title, that's under an NDA. We're working Man of Action on another video game. Joe Kelly just announced the Deadpool video game that he's been working on. That's exciting. And a bunch of cartoon stuff, which we still have Hello Neighbor on YouTube. I voiced one of the characters in there, but I think I'm dead now. I'm not sure. Can't remember what's out and what's not. And some other animated stuff that is similarly not announced.
And we're back. Steve, thanks for being on the show. We have more Man of Action colleagues coming up and future episodes, but really excited to kick it off with Steve this week. Would love to have him back on. I feel like most guests, we only kind of scratch the surface of his career. He's done just so much great stuff and would love to hear what's going on in the future with him. So look out for his work. Please visit Man of Action, their website or whatever, and that'll do it for today's episode of the Dollar Bin Bandits. Thank you for listening. Thank you for viewing. Thank you for rating, reviewing, subscribing. Thank you for checking out Patreon. We continue to pump out more bonus material. So check that out, Dollar Bin Boosters on Patreon. And we'll see you next issue.